Welcome and thanks for joining us for Two Steps Forward, our daily Bible study. I'm James. This is Aid. We're up to episode 367 and John chapter 2 here today. So we just started John's Gospel yesterday. John's Gospel is not one of the synoptic Gospels. The other three basically tell the same basic outline and story and events. John's Gospel tells the significance of those events and in greater detail. If you haven't read through John chapter 2, please pause and be sure to do that right now. But here's my summary for John 2. The miracle that we have to start out, it's the first publicly recorded miracle of Jesus, is him turning water into wine. So Jesus is attending a wedding at Cana in Galilee with his mother and his disciples, and the wine was gone, and Jesus' mother notified Jesus of the situation. Jesus asked why she would involve him since, quote, his hour had not yet come. But Mary told the servants to do whatever Jesus told them. Apparently she had some kind of understanding of what he was capable of. And there were 6 stone jars nearby which held 20 to 30 gallons of water. Jesus told the servants to fill them up, and he then told them to take the jars to the master of the banquet to drink. They did so, and the master tasted the water, and it had been turned into wine. He questioned where it came from and communicated with the bridegroom that this was the best wine yet, asking why he'd saved it till the end when people typically bring out the best wine first. This is the first recorded, again, miracle or sign. Sign is the more commonly used word in John's Gospel, which means that points to something significant. But it's the first recorded sign that Jesus performed, strengthening his disciples' faith in him. And Jesus then went down to Capernaum with his mother, brothers, and disciples, where they stayed for several days. When it was time for the Passover, Jesus went to Jerusalem and found many people selling sacrifices at the temple. Jesus at this point makes a whip, and he drove everyone out of the temple courts. Actually, there's 2 different words used for whip in the New Testament. This is a less violent whip. So he's not hurting people by doing this, but he is scattering people. He drives everyone out of the temple courts. He overturned the money changers' tables in anger. And to the salesman, he said, "Stop turning my Father's house into a market." The disciples saw how clearly Jesus identified the temple with his Father's house. And the Jews responded by asking for a sign that Jesus had the authority to act this way. He told them to destroy the temple and he was going to raise it in 3 days. And the Jews are very confused about this and said it took 46 years to build this temple, Herod the Great's sort of addition to the temple. And Jesus, however, was speaking about his body. John, the writer here, notes that after Jesus' resurrection, his disciples remembered what he had said on this day. And while they were in Jerusalem for the Passover, many saw the signs Jesus performed and believed in him, but Jesus knew who his real followers were. This is John chapter 2. Anything before we get started? Okay. Devotional thought number 1 for the day. We're going to call it the never-ending party. So here's the thing about Jewish weddings. Virgins got married on Wednesdays. Widows, those are the only real two categories actually at the time. Mm-hmm. Virgins got married on Wednesdays. Widows got married on Thursdays. And the party lasts the entire week. Now, the groom is responsible for providing food and beverage provisions for everyone. I mean, if you think weddings cost a lot today, and they do. But back then, you had this entire company of people, and you got to provide food for them for an entire week.
It seems a little excessive.
Everybody, I guess, kind of has to do it, in their own turn. So I guess it evens out. But it's really embarrassing to run out of food and beverage. Mm-hmm. When they realize, first of all, we don't even really know whose wedding this is. We might think it's maybe a friend of Mary's because she seems to have this insider information that they've run out of wine. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't actually say that. We know that Nathanael is actually from Cana in Galilee. It's noted in the gospel. But so maybe it's one of his friends. But then why are all the disciples and Jesus and Mary there? So we don't have all the details. It might be a mutual friend. But again, somehow Mary knows that they've run out of wine.
Is she specifically asking him to turn?
Yeah, that we don't actually know. So one of the big questions is, has he performed miracles up until this point? So some commentators will say this is his very first miracle, and some commentators will say this is his first public recorded miracle.
Oh, so you think he could have been doing miracles like all throughout his childhood?
Yeah, and some conservative commentators fight back against that because that's what some of the pseudo-gospels record. So like you've heard of some of these things before, the Gospel of Thomas and things like this, which are not recognized by the early church as actual gospels, but some of them have stories of Jesus, for instance, picking up a dead bird and bringing it back to life and those kinds of things. So is it possible that he did anything like that? It's certainly possible, and the fact that Mary seems to know he can do something to affect the situation here leads me to suggest he has these kinds of powers.
Just one thing it said in this commentary was that his dad is dead at this point. So she's probably used to going to him as the oldest for with all kinds of problems, like needing help with all kinds of things. So it wouldn't be unusual for her to go to him.
Yeah, that's a
to
good
help
point.
solve a problem. I don't know.
Yeah, yep. No, it probably was kind of practical. Maybe she hadn't seen miracles prior to this. Maybe she's just alerting him to the fact that there's a problem. We don't know for sure, but he agrees. He agrees to help. And there's 6 large jars of water. So again, procuring fresh water in that day is a little bit difficult. And so you have large vessels that are used for it. They're like 20, 30 gallon vessels for water. He says, fill them up. And then he says, take the water to the master of ceremonies. He goes, or he drinks it and he says, what are you doing? This is the best. This is better than any of the wine we had before. Usually you do the best wine first. And from there on out, when people's taste buds get numbed a little bit, then you serve them the cheaper stuff. But it's better than all of the rest of it. And I think the point here is, we'll talk a little bit more about this, that Jesus' miracles tend to be restorations of the kingdom. So, for instance, when he heals people and he drives out demons and he makes the lame walk and he makes the blind see, he's undoing things that only come about as a result of sin. And then the question becomes, okay, well, what is he potentially undoing with turning water into wine? And I think the thing that he's undoing here is God never designed for parties to end. Good times are supposed to last forever. But the problem with good times here on earth in a fallen world is they come to an end. In fact, if you try to squeeze too much out of good times today and you do things like drink too much, you get the hangover on the next day. So there's consequence attached to trying to squeeze too much out of a fallen world. But the restoration here is that God in heaven will go to a place where the banquet actually never does end.
Maybe it was Mary's wedding. Was it Wednesday or Thursday?
We don't know. We don't have those details. And nor do we, when Jesus dies and he says, woman, here is your son, to John, that would seem to suggest she does not have another.
Which is strange because he has brothers.
Yeah. However, we don't believe that his brothers are believers until after his resurrection. So maybe at that point he's saying, I want a spiritual brother to take care of my mother. So, my basic question here was, do you like wedding celebrations, wedding receptions, I guess? And does anything in that resonate with the picture of heaven? I say that as somebody who personally, I don't dislike them. I don't almost ever like being dressed up. So
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. At first, I thought, yeah, I do like them, and then I thought, I don't really. The older I get, the less I like doing things for tradition's sake. So being told where to sit and what to wear, and
yes,
it is a little uncomfortable.
Wear these uncomfortable shoes for all eternity. All right. So maybe cake and good food and like that. But the picture of a wedding reception, I think for people in that day too, it was not only kind of splurging for good food and celebration. It's time off of work. And it's being with your family. So all of that has a party atmosphere to it. So I actually think in those days, the concept of a wedding banquet resonated a little bit.
Well, I do think a family wedding is probably more enjoyable than just a friend's wedding, right?
Yeah.
Because your entire extended family would be there.
Where people know each other, yeah. All right, devotional thought number 2, a greater Moses. So actually, this is the first time I've heard it put like this, but I thought it was interesting. One commentator I read pointed out that, so again, remember we said yesterday, John's gospel is big on imagery and types, like fulfillments of Old Testament imagery. He said, so we know another type of Messiah in the Old Testament is Moses. Moses is a great deliverer, but one greater than Moses would come. He's a great prophet. One greater than Moses would come. Moses' first public miracle, so his first public miracle, not just to convince the Israelites that he should be their leader, because he had some miracles for that, but his first public miracle before Pharaoh was turning water into blood. So the first of the 10 plagues. Jesus, who is a greater Moses, his first miracle is turning water into wine. And one of the ways this commentator put it is like Moses' whole thing was he is giving the law, and that brings death. Jesus is giving the gospel, and he brings life and celebration. And I thought that was kind of an interesting like juxtaposition between the two and the type of Moses being fulfilled in Jesus. Moses the lawgiver, Jesus the grace giver. That idea, is there any, I was trying to brainstorm miracles of Jesus that were like restorations of the kingdom that I'm like, I'm not exactly sure how that is a restoration of the kingdom. Are there any others that you can think of? Like, I'm not, so like blind to see is kind of obvious. Lame, like walking, lame to being able to walk is probably obvious. Deaf to hearing or mute to speaking.
Well, I had asked you about the wine before.
Okay. I don't know, I'm trying to think of any others. Maybe the walking on water one.
Yeah.
And that...
Although I feel like that was to show he had control over the...
Right.
Over Earth.
Yes, he has, right, because absolutely the belief at that time is if you can control nature, you have to be superhuman, like a god. For that matter, even the fact that like nothing can hinder you from coming directly to... Nothing should prevent someone from having access to God, not even water, like to walk on. So, but it's one of those things that it really, for me, sort of unlocked the concept of miracles in the New Testament. Is like, no, he's recreating the world in the form that it's supposed to be. Devotional thought number 3 then. The cleansing of the temple, or a clean temple. This is the first instance actually of Jesus cleansing the temple. It's going to happen again during Holy Week. Some people have suggested, well, maybe this is the same instance but recorded twice. I actually think it is 2 different instances. One is at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. One is at the end of his ministry. In both cases, he's making the same basic point that so what's going on here, the thing that he takes issue with is the practice of selling sacrifices at the temple originally began as a merciful practice so that people who were making pilgrimages to the temple during the 3 major festivals, they didn't have to bring goats and sheep and oxen with them. They could just go there and then purchase the sacrifice and make the sacrifice there. Well, it became this thing of like exorbitant fees and materialistic and everything. Everybody was concerned about the economics of it, which was totally taken away from the worshipful environment of what was going on there. When Jesus cleanses the temple, he is largely then saying, he's not only saying, okay, this has become a corrupted environment, but and to some extent he's saying like this whole system of temple like this, it's like the old covenant, it doesn't work. It's proven it doesn't work. It's not that it was wrong, but it's not good enough to save humanity. And then it's actually at this point that he actually suggests that they could destroy the temple and he would raise it in 3 days. And again, Herod's temple, which remember there are different temple periods, but Herod's temple, he adds to the Jewish temple starting around 20 BC, and it's not actually going to be done until about 64 AD. So this is a massive, massive building project, and then gets largely destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans.
How long did it take Noah to build the ark? Like 4 years?
100 years.
Oh, 100.
Yeah. So this is a massive feat of architecture.
That's how long it took Ken Ham to build the ark. 4 years.
Yeah. Ken and his family members, yes. the Jews are, again, only seeing things from a materialistic perspective. They're like, how are you going to possibly destroy this temple, and for that matter, then rebuild it afterwards? But we know in retrospect that John he's already explaining here. This is an interesting thing too, because he's not like writing it in real time. He's writing it 70 years later after the fact. And he's saying, okay, when Jesus did this, we disciples didn't actually understand what he was talking about until he was raised from the grave. And then it made sense.
Yeah.
I think here, as far as like the cleansing the temple thing, I've always wondered about this, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, and I don't want to sound condemning in any way in regards to this, because for that matter, it wasn't even wrong for the Jews to do it. They just did it in an incorrect way that distracted from worship. But the issue of selling things at church, like I've both heard people say this in kind of a judgy way, like you should never possibly sell anything at church. And I've also heard it kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, where people were just kind of, I don't know, it was like a little, I don't want to say loosey-goosey, but they were like there probably should be some parameters for like selling stuff all the time.
About like Christian recording artists before.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's no secret I love Phil Wickham. But his latest concert series that he just finished up was called like Nights of Worship or something, and it was marketed as like a sing-along. Like it is worship versus like a concert.
Yeah.
But I guarantee that he's selling all
the
merchandise like in the atrium afterwards.
Yeah, it just...
So like you're there to worship, but you're also paying to do it, and to do it with him. And then you're paying if you want any of his like merchandise. Again, I don't know. Is it wrong? He's clearly bringing like worship into the hands of the individual with his music.
Yeah.
He makes his music available to churches and to be used for worship.
Yeah. It's really tough because, one, we don't really have any New Testament precedent like that.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing that would really compare to and would seem pretty much out of place in the New Testament. On the flip side of that, somebody can make the argument that like Paul advocates that the worker is worth his wage in the New Testament. If somebody is serving the church in that capacity, do they have a right to some sort of compensation for it? So I don't think that we can draw too clear boundaries, but I think what would be wrong is to not think it through, and to be just kind of careless about it one way or the other, to be unnecessarily judgy or to be just completely unthoughtful and thinking like using some discretion on this kind of thing. If you just put up price tags on everything, like people might get the wrong impression about who God is and who the church is along the way.
Well, I recently went to a basilica and they had a gift shop where they were selling like holy water, and things like that. No, that is. My grandma always had like a little vial of holy water on her dresser.
Yeah, and so obviously we don't believe in holy water, so that would be like you're just purchasing a vial of water at that point. But,
a lot of people have sold me a bottle of water, and I bought it every time.
Yeah. Again, and I don't even want to, like, the initial practice of selling, it was a merciful act to sell the sacrifices, the animals for sacrifice at the temple. It was very convenient for the pilgrims. So like that actually was a good idea, and that wasn't what Jesus was condemning. It was the corruption attached to the practice, and it was the fact that it had consumed everybody's thought during that time. And so I don't want to put too clear of restrictions on it, but there is clearly a point where it becomes too much. All right.
As with most things, right?
Correct. All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you for the time in your word here today. Jesus, we are looking forward to a day where good times don't end. And whether we think about that as a wedding celebration or a wonderful meal or simply just perfect time with you, where we don't have to worry about the stuff of earth anymore, we are looking forward to that day. We ask that you come quickly and call us home soon, but in the meantime, we sing your praises, looking forward to that day. May it glorify your name. Amen. Thanks for studying with us today. We'll see you next time for John chapter 3.